Alrighty. So the last couple of things we need to talk about for ethics is going to be some issues that come up as they're related to social psych. The first, once again, is going to be deception. Now, the deal with deception is that it makes the informed consent that we talked about earlier kind of difficult to work through. So in my example, where we provoke people in the lab, we have to deceive them and let them believe that they're interacting with a real partner. But in the informed consent, we can't say that. All right, we can't say in informed consent that we are going to make you think there's a partner next door when really there's not, because then that would negate the whole purpose. So deception gets really tricky, and social psychology deceives a lot. All right, we're going to talk about a lot of cool studies in here where we deceive, where the field, we deceive people. And to be honest, I mean, think of the Milgram study. I mean, they had to deceive people all the time. And although the debriefing deals with the deception, because in the debriefing you have to detail not only how you lied to them and what you lied about, but why you had to do it. The deception, it does create a little bit of an ethical kind of conundrum where how much deception is too much, and how, even if you divulge all the information in the debriefing, participants, when they read the informed consent, they aren't exactly, they're not agreeing to everything that you promised would happen. So it creates a little bit of a problem. And that's just an issue that needs to get brought up. And I don't know the right answer here to fix it. I mean, obviously, I use deception. My deceptions tend to be pretty minor, but still, it is an ethical issue where I'm having participants fill out this informed consent describing what the study's about, but I don't divulge all the details. All right, so it gets a little bit of a problem. But once again, as an IRB member, I understand that if we're going to use deception, we have to do it unless, for the reason of, if we don't do it, we cannot study the behavior we're interested in. All right, so that's where the problem lies. The second issue is going to be something called special populations. And special populations are groups of people who are unique. So we already talked about children in the previous one, where children are technically a special population because they are not old enough to legally sign an informed consent. And basically, that doesn't mean we can't do research on them. All right, we still can, and we still do. What makes this population special is that we know that minors, they may be more or less susceptible to certain manipulations, and certain things you may do or show to them may be, I guess, a little more psychologically damaging or iffy than to an adult. So let me give you an example. When I was at Iowa State, I worked for the biggest video game researcher in the world. His name is Craig Anderson. And what we would typically randomly assign people to play a violent or non-violent video game. And let's take a video game like Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat is an extremely bloody fighting game where they stab people with swords and rip off heads, and there's so much blood in this game that, if you barely touch them, like, blood spews out of the characters' faces and lands on the floor. And in current versions of the game, if you walk in their blood, then you can leave a bloody footprint kind of throughout the rest of this virtual world as you're fighting. So very bloody. Now, but we ethically we cannot show that to a child. We cannot have an 8-year-old come in and play that game, because that is ethically a problem, and that's what makes them a special population, is that ethically it's damaging. It could potentially be more damaging to an 8-year-old versus, let's say, a 19-year-old who can sign their own informed consent. All right, other special populations would be things like prisoners. So one of the things that we were trained on is that if you are going to research prisoners, then you have to understand, and you're going to pay them, let's say with a grant, you have to understand that prisoners make something like, I don't know, $1 or $2 a day, maybe at best, with the jobs they do. So if you're going to pay someone $20 to do your study, that's like, that's like 2 weeks worth of your wages. And that ethically, so, and of course everyone's going to say, yeah, let's do the study, even if they don't want to, because the pay is so much. Additionally, some prisoners may think, oh, I'm doing the study, I'm showing I'm a good person, and that's going to help me get parole, or it's going to give me a better jail cell, or whatever perks may come with this. And that's also not true, but prisoners don't know that. And so you have to go and do, if you're going to do research with prisoners, you have to go and do these extra kind of safeguards to make sure that they understand that. And so what makes a population special is that they have to, as a researcher, you have to go above and beyond what is typical in terms of the ethical considerations than you would an average college student or an average adult. But we can still do research on them, and very good research is being done on them. I would say children are in terms of special populations, I would argue that children are probably the most studied versus prisoners or fetuses are a special population. And what's going to happen with these children is we just had to go through these extra miles. Like, so what do? I study aggression, like I talked about before, but I also study cyberbullying. And so I have done a lot of work with the school districts here, and I have to go out of my way to get permission from the superintendent, from the principals of the buildings, all the way to, and once I get past those people, then depending on the study, I may have to go through the school board to get their approval. And once I do, I have to go through the IRB here. And once that gets approved, then I have to go to the parents and do parental consent. And then once I get those, and the kids actually finally get to come and do my study, I have to get child assent. So there's a lot of hurdles to jump through. But once again, the science is important to do, so the hurdles are just kind of something you just have to deal with. And at any point in time, if someone feels uncomfortable with the study they're doing, the study is stopped. And that's just the way it works. And that's how it works with special populations. All right. So that's it for the ethical pieces of this. Obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about it, but they're important. They're important for social psych. And we're going to talk about them throughout the course of the study as well. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of switch gears real quick away from ethics to talk about different types of ways we test hypotheses, and that's going to be the research designs that we pick. All right, so let's first talk about correlation. Now, the goal of correlation here is to predict y from x. So let's use some terminology here. So y in this case, the letter y means the dependent variable, and the letter x means the independent variable. All right, so the dependent variable, let's just define that real briefly. The dependent variable is basically the outcome. It's the thing you want to measure and study at the end of it. So it doesn't have to be a behavior, although it could. In the CHAMP example I gave before, where they watched the CHAMP, they were filling out questionnaires that says, how do you feel right now? Well, there are answers on that. That is the dependent variable. Now the y is going to, so that's the y. The letter y means dependent variable. Now the letter x means typically the independent variable. And that's going to be the variable that you think will excite changes in the dependent variable. All right, so let me say that one more time. The independent variable, or the letter x in this case, is the variable you think will incite changes into the dependent variable. All right, hence the word dependent variable. It's dependent upon the independent variable. And so the goal here is prediction. And what we're looking at here is relationships. All right, so the relationships that exist. Now, in terms of statistics, we're looking at these relationships. We're going to look at them with the correlation coefficient. The correlation coefficient is a number that ranges from -1 to 1. So a correlation of -1 means that as the independent variable goes up, the dependent variable goes down. So they go in the opposite directions. Or conversely, obviously, if the independent variable goes down, the dependent variable goes up. So let me give you an example of a negative correlation. A negative correlation would be something like the relationship between the amount of time you spend partying and your overall grade in the course. So as your partying goes up, grades will go down. Positive correlations are the opposite of that. The independent and dependent variable move in the same direction. So as one goes up, so does the other. And as one goes down, so does the other. So an example of a positive relationship would be height and weight. So as people get taller, they also get heavier. All right. So these correlations, they're denoted with the letter R. So that's going to be the correlation coefficient. So when we do a lot of our readings, we're going to see R equals some value. And you just have to work through knowing what that means. Now you can also, so let's draw this thing out real quick. So if you have, let's say, a positive correlation, all right, so let's draw this out. So this is your X variable, and this is your Y variable. A positive correlation will look something like this. So as X goes up and gets higher, Y also goes up with it. Now a negative correlation, let's just draw that out, will look something like this with the dotted line. Oh, all right, well, it's just the dotted line. And that dotted line, it's as X goes up, Y goes down. Now finally, you can have a zero correlation. And a zero correlation, the data points would look, something like this. They would kind of be randomly kind of spread out all over the place. And what's going to happen with this is there's going to be no relationship whatsoever. So let's talk about an example of a no relationship would be like the relationship between eating peaches and pro-social behavior. As the number of peaches you eat goes up, it shouldn't influence helping whatsoever. And that line would look something like this. It'd be straight across, meaning that there's no relationship that exists between the two. Now, remember, what we're doing here is that we're talking about relationships as they exist. And so what we're trying to do is assess this measurement and assess the statistic. Now, what's good about this thing is that it's really easy to do. Correlations are super simple. All I have to do is just give you two questionnaires, let's say, one that measures the independent variable and one that measures the dependent variable. You fill out those questionnaires, and then I correlate them and see as one variable goes up, your X variable, your independent variable. What about the Y variable? Does it go up? Does it go down? What's going on with that? So that's one of the things that we can look at when we look at correlations. All right, so it's actually a kind of a cool thing itself. And the correlation coefficient, this R value here. All right, so this thing here, this is the thing that actually tells us what our relationship looks like. Now in social psych, even though the correlation goes from -1 to 1, in social psych, we're never going to get there. I have never, ever seen a perfect correlation in my life, and I never will. Typically, what's going to happen is if we see, if we see a correlation of, let's say, 0.23, I'm happy. All right, now 0.23, you may be like, well, Chris, that's close to 0. It's closer to 0 than it is closer to 1. But we have to understand that in social psych, because we're dealing with humans, remember, we can never prove anything. And when we deal with humans, we're going to get times where that 0.23 is awesome and important. Let's back up. I have seen correlations of that magnitude, 0.09, as statistically significant and important. All right? So correlation coefficients, they can range, and in social psych, we're dealing with not incredibly high ones. My brother-in-law is like an aerospace engineer or something like that, and he once told me that if they don't have a correlation between their like building materials and some performance measure of like 0.98, they don't use it. I was like, 0.98? Oh my gosh, if I found a correlation of 0.98, I would just freak out. And I would be like, I don't believe it. I don't trust it. Because it's too high for social psychologists, but not for like engineers. All right, so you got to put that in context as well.